What number will suffice? How high must it go? How many dead? Soon we'll count the 12 days of Christmas. What will they bring this year instead of gold rings and calling birds and partridges in pear trees? When will we, as supposed civilizations, say enough is enough? There are so many numbers, it's hard to know where to start. Around the world, the number of excess deaths in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, whatever COVID was, and the rollout of the products marketed as vaccines keeps rising, cycling ever upwards, glowing as bright red as any warning light on a car dashboard, surely declaring something somewhere is dangerously wrong, and yet still the world carries on regardless. Barely a question asked about why so many people, apparently fit and well, who should still be alive and well, are dropping down dead before their time. We are in fact ignoring plane loads worth of extra deaths, one plane load after the other, as it were, week after week, silently falling. But no matter, apparently, certainly not worth talking seriously about in any public forum, far less seeking and finding explanations, remedies. The Battle of Borodino was fought between Russia and France in the September of 1812 and made a hellish heap of slain, the equivalent, according to British-Canadian historian Gwyn Dyer, of a fully laden jumbo jet crashing every 5 minutes for 8 hours. Those are dreadful numbers to contemplate, even after all this time. More than 2 centuries later, historians still wonder at that carnage, measurable in plane loads, and yet right now we watch our own slow-motion Borodino, boom, 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 and do nothing. A plane load worth of extra death, week in and week out, in each of many countries all over the world, over and over, month after month, year after year. Ask nothing, say nothing. Instead, the extra thousands fall unnoticed or at least disregarded as inconvenient truth by the authorities nominally charged with our well-being. In England this year, excess death totals are up in all age groups, from youngest to oldest. Bigger numbers of heart failures, bigger numbers of deaths from other heart disease, bigger numbers of strokes, bigger numbers of deaths from circulatory diseases, bigger numbers of deaths from kidney disease. By the middle of 2023, in the UK, there were, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, more than 36,000 excess deaths. 36,000 people dead against normal expectations in part of a single year. We're hardly alone in the loss. In the United States, the life insurance industry has reported a 24% increase in deaths of people aged 15 to 19 years, a 23% increase for 30 to 34-year-olds, a 25% increase in 40 to 44-year-olds. By the 30th week of this year, there were more than 147,000 excess deaths recorded in America. For the sake of comparison, the official tally of the US dead after 2 decades of war in Vietnam was just over 58,000 dead. Like here, the grim tally of excess deaths in the US involves bigger numbers of heart attacks in all age groups, bigger numbers for diabetes, bigger numbers for kidney disease deaths, bigger numbers for liver disease deaths. Like here, ask why, and the question falls on mostly deaf ears. The Society of Actuaries in the US, people in an industry where death costs money and reduces profits so that its professionals tend to know that of which they speak, predicts the numbers of excess deaths will continue to rise in the States in the years ahead. And so it goes on. Excess deaths up this year in Australia by more than 20% so far, up in Canada, up in Ireland, up in Netherlands, up in New Zealand. Are these numbers, these bald statistics in front of our faces, being reported worriedly or angrily by mainstream news? Are our politicians gathering hurriedly and en masse to ask questions and seek answers? Is the science under pressure to explain what's happening and thereby turn back the deadly tide? Like me, you know the answer to those questions is a resounding no. When a few brave souls do force the issue into the chamber of the House of Commons, the vast majority of our elected representatives stays away in droves. And so I ask again, how many dead will be enough? Which number? Look away from the mainstream media and towards independent sources of information, independent media, and there are more big numbers to be found and contemplated. Always, it's harder to find those numbers. Almost impossible, in fact, because they are deliberately overshadowed by others generated for bought and paid for stories in those medical journals and other publications that were once esteemed but now stand exposed as offering their reputations and credibility for sale to the highest bidder. A scientific paper published in Lancet last year claimed the rollout of the products marketed as vaccines against COVID saved tens of millions of lives. It was the work of a research group headed by Azra Ghani of Imperial College London and funded by, among others, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines Initiative, also funded by Gates. Just to be clear, largely funded by bodies standing to make money from the sale of vaccine products. Azra Ghani has been a consultant for the World Health Organization and GlaxoSmithKline and was in favour of locking down and in favour of jabbing with those products throughout the pandemic. The claim of tens of millions of lives saved was based not on real-world data, but on mathematical modelling. In a critique for the Brownstone Institute, the paper was dismissed as, quote, no more than an opinion piece, as all work based on mathematical modelling must be. And yet its declaration about millions of lives saved went around the world and back again, eagerly quoted by countless politicians, physicians and mainstream media. Other websites carrying the findings of other mathematical modelling and statistical analysis by credible and esteemed scientists that find nothing less than the absolute contrary to the Ghani paper, that calculate numbers of deaths after the rollout of equivalent magnitude equal and opposite to those claims of lives saved. Why trust one set of figures from mathematical modelling or statistical analysis broadcast and repeated to this day, while simultaneously ignoring and refusing to discuss others drawing alternative, indeed diametrically opposed conclusions? Why isn't all of this freely, openly and honestly discussed without prejudice by those notionally committed to saving lives? As I understand it, that's a big part of how science is supposed to be done. Big pharma giant Pfizer is being sued now by the state of Texas on behalf of more than 30 million people on the grounds that the company misrepresented its product. Pfizer claimed an effectiveness for its product of 95% or above. The Texas state prosecutor alleges an effectiveness of less than 1%. More numbers. Which to believe? In any event, is the action in Texas providing a big enough number? 30 million people. The AstraZeneca vaccine product is apparently defective, labelled thusly after being injected into hundreds of millions of arms, the arms of babies and pregnant women and the rest. The troubling, humbling numbers that keep me awake at night aren't restricted to the fields of medicine and big pharma. I, for one, am also dizzied and horrified by the numbers of human beings, military and civilian, presently being harvested in wars and other conflicts around the world. 32 wars and conflicts, according to the Council on Foreign Relations Global Conflict Tracker, at this time of the year when, by tradition, we talk to each other about wishing peace and goodwill to all men. In Ukraine, 500,000 men, boys and women, Ukrainian and Russian both, are dead in an ongoing war that might have been ended months ago, not long after it began, in fact, if it hadn't been deliberately prolonged until billions of dollars, pounds and euros were pumped through that wounded, hemorrhaging heart, and thanks to their enablers in Washington, straight into the bank accounts of Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin and the rest of the arms manufacturers grown fat on the trillions of unaudited dollars that flow through the Pentagon every year. Millions, billions, trillions. How many more unimaginable numbers must we read or hear before we say collectively that enough is enough? How high must we count until the sickening shame of all the death sees someone somewhere sated and satisfied? How much bigger? How much higher? Mathematicians have a name for a number with 100 zeros or more. It's called a screech. Is that what it will take? A screech for all the dead and dying? How many more people must die in Gaza and the West Bank before the screech is heard and listened to? How many dead babies? How many dead babies is enough dead babies? How many more babies and toddlers and children and men and women, young and old, in the so-called Holy Land will be enough? Not enough so far, apparently, since the bombs still fall and the bullets still fly. I've said before, and I'll say again, that if you're feeling utterly overwhelmed, hopeless and helpless in the face of all that's happening around us, drowning among much else in numbers beyond comprehension, then that's because the intention of those above us in the food chain is that you should feel that way. The more you feel that way for long enough, then, the thinking goes, the more likely it is you'll be receptive to whatever solutions you're offered, whichever remedies. When I was a little boy, every Christmas morning, my mum would play a song on the record player. It was When a Child is Born by Johnny Mathis. The lyrics are ingrained in me after all these years. A silent wish sails the seven seas, the winds of change whisper in the trees, and the walls of doubt crumble, tossed and torn. This comes to pass when a child is born. Sentimental? No doubt, but I like the thought of the winds of change. I also love the thought of children being born, the manifestation of all the hope in the world. Here's the thing, the numbers are so big now, the stakes are so high in the face of so much suffering, it all must crumble, and soon, when it does, when the reality lands at our feet, we'll have a choice, either to blindly stumble towards a dark place or to stop and take a stand against those who seek to take from the world and not to give.